Hi, it's Charlie Minato from halfwheel.com, and today I am reviewing the NewAir CC-100H, which is an electronic humidor. And so back in the day when I was on cigar forums a lot more than I am now, you would see pictures of people with wine coolers that had been converted into humidors. And the reason why people did this is because wine coolers are generally set to control temperature in between 50 to 70 degrees as opposed to a traditional refrigerator. And that's, at least the top end, ideally what you want cigars to be stored at. So if you live in a hot climate like here in Texas, it can oftentimes get very hot. And as such, your cigars will get hot, which can eventually lead to problems like mold and beetles. And so people would take wine coolers and they would convert them into humidors. There were people that started separate businesses where they were making custom trays, some of which I bought for wine coolers, and people would buy things like heartfelt beads and electronic humidifiers and other Johnson control temperature devices and all sorts of things. And I, as you can tell, bought most of those things. And despite spending almost $1,000, still couldn't get my 28 bottle wine cooler conversion to really work as a sort of out of the box turnkey solution. And that's where companies like NewAir have come in, and they've taken what is otherwise a wine cooler and converted it over from the start to be a cigar humidor. And so this is an upgraded version of the NewAir CC-100, which is a $279 humidor of the same size. The H model has two different features. One is that it's got a locking mechanism down here, and so you can lock your cigars, which we'll get to in a second. And then the other thing is that this model also has a heating element. So if you live up north, over the winter, it might get too cold, particularly if you're storing your cigars in the basement. And so this actually can have a heating element that will heat them back up. And it recommends that you store this unit in between the ranges of about 50 degrees to about 77 degrees. So you don't want to put it in a freezing cold room or a really, really hot room. We stuck it into a closet that we have here that's got a gigantic beer fridge in it, which is the warmest room that we have in the office. And in temperature-wise, it performed quite well. I mean, it kept our cigar, according to Sensor Push, which is a device that you will be reviewing soon, it kept them in between 66 and 67 degrees, which is right where we set it at 66 degrees. And it went within 1.1 degrees Fahrenheit in terms of range. And so you can set that temperature up here, and so you just push up to move it up and down to move it down. And there's also this button here, which turns on a very unattractive blue light in the top. Now, this is sort of where the problems start. While it did a very good job of keeping the temperature and controlling the temperatures, unfortunately, there's no way to control the humidity. Instead, what NewAir suggests that you do is comes with this blue container, and it says that you should fill this up with water. It says if you want more control, you should fill it up with silicone beads, or I guess superabsorbent polymers is probably what most people would end up with, and then put them in this tray. None of those things are electronic. None of them, you have zero control unless you are using beads or another passive solution like that where they're preset to a certain relative humidity. Now what the device does do a good job is keeping the humidity in the unit. So when I first started using this, I used the water as the instruction manual suggested, and it actually was way too wet. It was staying at about 77 to 78% relative humidity. It was very consistent in staying well over what I wanted it to be, but it was way too wet to be storing cigars into it. And so I ended up using first a Cigar Oasis unit, which is an electronic humidifier that's got some controls on it. And then I wanted to see over the last couple of weeks if I put a few Bovedas in, what would happen, given that's a solution that's not as high powered as the Cigar Oasis. And to my surprise, the Bovedas actually are still fresh, and the unit performed well. We put 69 Boveda packets in, and the temperature range, or the relative humidity range, sorry, was within 0.9%. And so that's as good as you should expect, generally speaking, in a humidor, let alone something that's a wine cooler. So this does have that somewhere in it where I assume in the back, where the unit has been modified so that the relative humidity isn't being sucked out like a traditional wine cooler would be. So as you can see, this tray also includes cigars. It comes with a hygrometer that I have not calibrated, although it is somewhat removable. It's an analog cheap hygrometer. I wouldn't suggest trusting this to be particularly useful. Now, it also comes included with these shelves. The company claims that all this is Spanish cedar. It doesn't really smell like Spanish cedar, and it also sort of smells still like plastic, despite us spending about 2 weeks trying to get that smell out of it. I suspect that if you opened this up a lot more than we've been doing it, it probably would work better. One problem that I have with the unit though is it's the size of it. It's quite big for how many cigars you honestly can store in it, particularly if you store boxes. And the reason why is because if you take like this undercrown box, for example, it won't fit in this way. It will get stuck. And it's a little bit deceiving because, as with wine coolers, the openings right here and on each side are actually larger than it sort of filters into it. And so while it can clear the first part of it, it can't clear inside. And so if you have an undercrown box like this, you're sort of just forced to put it in like that and call it a day. You definitely could stick some additional cigars in there. If you had cigars in coffins, for example, it wouldn't be a bad place. But it's pretty challenging to fit but more than particularly 2 boxes, even if they're small 10-count boxes like this, because so we have these 2 boxes, and these are medium-sized 10-count boxes. They aren't large. They certainly stack on top of each other well, but there's only about 2 inches of usable room left in there. And so once again, that's not deep enough to put an additional cigar box. And it's particularly deceiving when you look at just how big the unit is if I turn it to its side. I'll do that right now so you can see. That's probably not sounding great on the film. But you can see here that the unit is quite deep, particularly considering that you can only fit you know, a few or maybe a handful of boxes of cigars in here if you're going to use the shelves. Now, one solution would be to not use the shelves. And if you chose to do that, I have a feeling you could fit a lot more cigars in it. Now, the company claims you can get 250 cigars in here. I think that that's certainly physically possible. I think it would be also physically challenging to do that, particularly to make them usable and without damaging it. Now, we haven't had the ability to test the heating unit because it's 98 degrees outside right now here in Texas, so I can't tell you if that function works. What I can tell you is that the lock is something that you should only be using if you are trying to keep this out of the hands of your children. And so the lock, it comes with a set of keys here. This uses just a basic hexagon type connection. Now, I did try to see if we had anything in our 91-piece tool set that actually would open this, and it turns out that we didn't have the right size 5-sided hexagon shape here. But I imagine that if you had like a 150-piece screwdriver set, you probably would have something that fits this size. Now, one interesting note and nice thing is that this actually, in order to actually lock it, you have to push into it. I think that's the key that doesn't work. And so you push into it and then you have to turn it. So it's got a little bit of a child-safe method. If you just go like this, it won't do anything. And it does lock. If you're trying to use this for, and so now it's locked. If you're trying to use this to keep, say, employees, or if you're afraid of random strangers sort of passing by your office, or maybe you rent your house out, you know, on Airbnb, and you want to keep them out of your cigars, I would suggest that you find something else. The problem is that if you turn this unit upside down, you'll find that the locking plate down here is held in by 2 Phillips screwdrivers that could be easily taken out and rendering the lock completely useless. So at $279 or $299, sorry, the unit certainly works. It would have been great for me in college, and I would have appreciated then. If you were to go this route and buy an electronic humidifier, my advice would be to buy the largest model that you find. NewAir, as well as some other companies, make some units that are sort of in that 28-count sweet spot. That's a unit that you probably aren't going to want to put in your living room. It's pretty big, and it's not the most attractive thing in the world. However, it stores an appropriate amount of cigars, I think, for this sort of investment. This is the cheapest model, or the second cheapest model, the entry-level way. And for me, I would just feel a lot better about having more space. That way, if I got, you know, say more than 4 boxes of cigars, I would be able to fit them in my humidor. So, for more reviews of humidors and, I don't know, maybe wine coolers at some point, don't forget to check out halfwheel.com.